Clients want advice to feel personal.
It's very hard to deliver consistent outcomes if every single advisor thinks they've got the secret sauce. We've lived through multiple crises and we're still here. Forget the headlines, ignore the noise. It's about your personal economy.
Often now we talk to our clients and they wouldn't even think that they're wealthy. Putting technology and automation onto a crappy process, you still get crappy outcomes. So it was just mind-blowing when we looked at how much time that is saving our advisors. I'm surprised still by how many people, sort of still ask me, do you think this is a good idea?
Finding ways to scale and build efficiencies to allow advisors to help more clients is a challenge for every advice business. Today, I wanted to understand how one advice business is tackling this challenge. From Equity Mates Media, this is Basis Points, a show that helps advisors find small improvements that compound into big outcomes. I'm Ren, and today I'm speaking to two leaders at Evalesco. Jeff Thurecht is the CEO, and Marshall Brentnall is the CIO. Together, they each have more than 20 years' experience in the advice business. In this conversation, we unpack how Evalesco balances scaling while providing personalized service, where Jeff and Marshall have most effectively used technology, including AI, to drive efficiencies throughout their business, how Evalesco manages the process of integrating other advice businesses, how you can build a clear idea of who your target client is and how you can build portfolios for them, and the importance of client communication, and some of the key lessons Jeff and Marshall have learned on how to communicate effectively. Now, before we get into it, we want to thank our three launch sponsors here at Basis Points. Thank you to Milford, thank you to Orbis Investments, and thank you to SIBO for helping us keep all of our content free. Without the support of these three partners, Basis Points would not be possible. Finally, a reminder that all episodes of Basis Points are accredited by the FAAA for CPD points. So if you're an advisor watching or listening, head to the link in the YouTube description or show notes, complete the quiz, and we'll send you a certificate. All right, with that said, let's get to my conversation with Jeff and Marshall. Jeff, Marshall, welcome to Basis Points.
Thanks, Ren. Good to be here.
So I'm excited for this one. Jeff, you're the CEO. Marshall, you're the CIO. Together, you sort of run this business, like all aspects of this business. And in this conversation, I really want to cover how you think about building an advice practice holistically, and then how you build client portfolios under that. When we were preparing for this episode, you spoke about sort of getting the balance right between scaling an advice practice and also then having a real level of personalisation in your service. And Jeff, I want to start with you because you made a comment that I found interesting. You said no client wants to be scaled. Can you just talk to that to kick us off?
Clients want advice to feel personal. So when we think about scaling the advice business, we need to make sure that what we're doing enhances that personal relationship. So we think about building, systems and processes and using the technology to do the stuff in the background, which is the admin and the compliance and the paperwork, so that we can allow our advisors to spend more time sitting with clients, having those deep personal conversations, and adding value to them in that way. So, the scale is of great benefit to the clients, but it's not what they feel or see at any stage of the relationship.
I guess that extends the scale v personalisation balance, extends beyond building the practice. It probably also applies to how you build portfolios as well. I guess every client wants to think it's personalised, but you want your portfolio construction to scale. How do you think about getting that balance on the portfolio construction side? Yeah,
it's an important balance to get right because, I guess within our business, we want to ensure that the advisors making the decisions at a client level are spending more of their time focusing on clients' goals and priorities. And within our business, we've got a smaller group of individuals that are effectively researching, building and maintaining portfolios that represent our best ideas.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to unpack hopefully get some of those best ideas as we go through this conversation. But I guess for people listening who are thinking about how they can build efficiency and the capacity to scale in their advice practice, what are some of the best learnings you've had and how can we think about that?
I think for all we're talking about in terms of building advice practice, scaling, it starts with people. So it starts with the clients in mind, but it also starts with the people within the industry and, who are sitting in front of clients. And so, there's no substitute for having great people. And we're lucky in our team. We've got lots of great people. So we want to give them the opportunity to spend more time in front of clients and adding value. So that's mostly the advisors, but it's also the broader team. So once we get the right people, it's about then having clear processes which can drive efficiency and having that consistent approach. So building that sort of one way, same way. And then technology really is becoming more important in terms of tying that all together. So it's, how can we automate? Where can we automate? How can we create better engagement through use of technology, but it's always people-led. And so an example for us is over the last 12 months, we've been really focused on integrating two businesses. So we took over another business about 12 months ago, and we've taken the view there that we're calling it one kitchen, two dining rooms.
Okay.
So we're really trying to bring the back office together and build consistency there first, but allow the clients and the advisors to continue to deliver that personal interaction that they've been used to. And so, things that we're doing there is, we've come onto one CRM as an example, now looking at, taking the best of both worlds in terms of processes and building them into that CRM so that we're, making a better approach. So there's always going to be improvements, and then we can look at how do we improve the client engagement piece. But we don't want to be shaking that up too much initially because it's been working pretty well in both businesses, and over time we can look at how do we improve that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting you on in a couple of years when you've got one kitchen, five dining rooms. I guess when we think about scale, it's often, for some reason, we think about it as like a negative or like a detractor to personalisation. But I'm sure there are some areas where scale has advantages and it can actually enhance the advice process or can allow for more personalisation in different areas. Can you talk to some of the benefits of scaling as well?
I think the benefits of scale are many as long as you come with the right approach. And for us, that's coming with a people-first approach. So we're not trying to be a robo-advice business, or we're not trying to have 100,000 clients. We're trying to slowly but surely grow the client base based on that personal advice and that personal service that we can do. So, the benefits of scale come in that back office and allowing advisors to spend more time in front of clients. That's one area. I think it's also, as you get more scale, you can look at the depth and the breadth of the services that you're able to provide. So it's very hard to be an expert across all areas when you're on your own, and then you've got to go out and write the SOA as well as, fill out the application forms and that sort of thing as well. So building that scale allows us to I guess, go deeper in some areas of speciality and have specialists in the business. So, we've got insurance specialists, aged care specialists, as well as Marsh touched on, really that speciality around the advice, the investment portfolio construction and how we do that. Yeah. So, we couldn't do that when it was just the two of us, but that gives us that opportunity as well. And then I think another, probably more obvious one is, you can drive down costs in terms of product costs or, hopefully over time cost to serve. We haven't really necessarily reached that point in some areas because, compliance costs and that sort of thing keep going through the roof. But at some point in time, hopefully we'll be able to pass that on to clients as well. In the portfolio side of things, there's certainly opportunities to drive down some costs in terms of delivering those portfolios to clients.
Well, I guess I want to ask both of you, I want to get really practical and understand some of the most important, systems or processes you've built or automated. You mentioned earlier that's a key, automating those processes is key to give your advisors more time. I'm sure it's also the same, Marshall, on the investment side in terms of giving your team more time to really focus on, what delivers results for clients. So for people listening who are thinking about their systems and where the biggest opportunities lie to really automate things and free up time, what have been the most impactful changes you guys have made in your practice? Jeff, I'll start with you and then...
I'll tee this one up for Marsh. He can hit the gap off in here. I think implementing SMAs in our business has been huge. So we did that about 8 years ago. And that has made a huge impact to the efficiency, the consistency and the outcomes that we're delivering for clients. So I think, it's a pretty common answer and there are lots of people moving down that path. But I'm surprised still by how many people, sort of still ask me, do you think this is a good idea? Yeah. And
your answer is
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay.
100%. So yeah, we've learnt a lot over that 8 years about how to build those portfolios, and we can talk. Marsh can pull that apart, and we can spend all day talking about that if you want to. So that's a really key one. I think another one that we've done is not necessarily in regards to automation, but it's around how we structure our advice teams so that they can provide more support to our clients. And so we took on some of this from doing client surveys and getting feedback from our clients saying that they wanted a clearer direction as to who they go to in our team for what, and who is their key relationship manager, but also from a continuity viewpoint, and as you're growing, to have, build those relationships over time so that if people are going on holidays or, coming and going from the business, that there's somebody else to talk to. So we've built a pod structure where all clients have 2 advisors in the relationship. So often it's an associate advisor or a more junior advisor with a senior advisor. And we've got some pods now where we're working more towards having, 2 of the juniors with 1 senior as the business has grown. So that just means that the more senior advisor is able to spend more time, a little bit more on business development, a little bit more on growing the client base, a little bit more higher level, and then the junior advisor or the associate is able to do more of the grunt work. But the client has 2 qualified, experienced, capable, kind and considerate people who they're able to work with and go to at various times.
Yeah, we're talking about that pod structure. My wife is training to be an obstetrician, and they work in that same pod structure in private practice a lot of the time. There's always someone on call when someone's sick or on holidays or has just come off a long shift. So I guess in your pod structure, any financial crisis, any time of day, an advisor's there ready to pick up the phone.
Yeah, exactly right. And then we've got the admin team that sits behind that, and we've changed that model a few times over the years. So at the moment we've got kind of a hybrid model of some of the larger pods have a direct admin person who's responsible for the ongoing review sort of work, and then we've got a team who does the implementation where there's new advice for existing clients or new clients coming in to separate that out. And that's from a skill set viewpoint, but also a training viewpoint. So for younger people coming into the team, starting them with a narrower set of tasks, making sure they can really nail those before trying to get them to go too broad. So we found that to be quite useful as well. So that's not on the automation side, but within that, then you do move to the automation and the use of technology and systems and processes, and it comes down to firstly having a clear understanding of what the right process is. Putting technology and automation onto a crappy process, you still get crappy outcomes. So, making sure the process is clear and is right before you start to try and automate it and build it out. And we're certainly on a journey at the moment. Technology is changing and evolving so quickly that where we are now, when we come back in 2 years and talk about the 5 dining rooms, we'll also talk about how much more is automated within our business. But all with the purpose of allowing our people to spend more time in front of our clients and add more value at that level.
Well, I like that you answered that question without saying the 2-letter buzzword that seems to be front and center in every conversation these days. Has AI been worked into any of your workflows at this point?
Yeah, so mainly from a file noting and document creation off the back of meetings is where we've started. So we've got some really good processes there. And it was just mind-blowing when we looked at how much time that is saving our advisors. So some of our advisors were spending 2 hours post-meeting on file notes and client follow-ups. Some of them were doing it in half an hour. So I was kind of like, to the guys doing 2 hours, like, what are you doing? But even if we can save 15 minutes for the guys who were taking half an hour, we can save an hour for the guys who are taking 2 hours. That's massive. Across, 12 advisors who are doing, 5 to 10 meetings a week, that's a massive time saving. So that's been quite revolutionary. Sometimes have to ask what are they doing with that saves time, but that's another conversation. But that's evolved from when we started working with that sort of process 12 or 18 months ago to now. Many more documents come off the back of that, organically, and you can sort of say, okay, take it from just a file note to a client follow-up email to a record of advice to a strategy paper to a paraplanning briefing document. So, moving further down that value chain, which has been huge. So that's been probably the key area where we've implemented AI. And then, looking now at how you can use some more of the robotic process automation stuff mainly within the Microsoft sort of suite. We've moved across to a Microsoft Dynamics-based CRM. And so keeping everything within Microsoft suite and building out some automation within there is the current sort of work on.
Yeah, wow. Nice. Marshall, on the investment side, what have been the sort of most important systems and processes to really automate and free your team up? And then I guess the AI question for you as well.
So I'll start with the AI piece because Jeff just finished on that. And certainly I use that quite a bit in my role. So we talk about how we engage with clients and use it for file noting and record keeping and whatnot. But I do the same thing with fund managers. So I wouldn't have a fund manager meeting now where I haven't got AI sort of tracking in the background and supporting the information around file noting processes. We use it for, reviewing and assessing portfolios across the business to see decision making at an advisor level, who's doing what, exposures to certain assets, that type of thing. So there's certainly heaps of capabilities in the Copilot suite, but at the very least, if you start with the file noting. So
I was going to ask, for your portfolio reviews, do you use Copilot?
In terms of reviewing the fund managers?
And when you see portfolios put together by advisors, what's the platform you're using?
Yeah, so we use Copilot to manage that. And
I'm just asking for purely selfish reasons because I might run my portfolio through it later.
Yeah, no problem. So, Copilot has some capabilities there, the different agents that they run.
Yeah.
So there's like a research module and then there's an analyst module as well.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
you can basically dump big spreadsheets in there and ask for themes, look for variations. So we're early days with that, but it's certainly been able to allow us to identify opportunities to support the advisors in, the broader Principal Edge and Evalesco family. Over the last month, we've got some client monies on Macquarie Wrap, so they've certainly had some headlines recently, and it's allowed us to really do some good diagnostics on those portfolios to see where we need to get on the front foot.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I want to ask you both about culture because as the business scales and particularly, as you're integrating advice businesses into the same kitchen, that becomes a really important piece of it. So, particularly in advice where so much of it is built on trust and client relationships. So as you scale the business, as you integrate different businesses, how do you guys think about maintaining the culture that sort of got you there? Jeff, why don't we start with you? Yeah,
so there's probably three key areas that I think about there. So the first one is that shared purpose. So it was great, we talked about bringing the two businesses together. The conversations at the, owner of the business level was really quite good over the first cup of coffee. There was very much that aligned vision of, what we should be doing for our clients and how we go about delivering advice and that sort of stuff. But that shared purpose across the team is really valuable. So we talk about empowering our community to be healthy, wealthy and happy. So we try to live and breathe that within the business. We try to, think about that when we're interacting with clients and communicating with clients and bring that into those communication pieces and those conversations as well. So that shared purpose is really valuable. The second one is open communication. So trying to be transparent as possible as leaders of the business with the team as to, what we're thinking about currently, why we're making certain decisions, what's coming next on our roadmap. Admitting when we get things wrong, which is, when you're trying to bring two businesses together and roll out new tech stacks and, we've got a lot wrong and caused a lot of people to, not like us, but we stand up in front and own that, be transparent and talk about what we're going to do to fix it. Yeah. And as long as we can back that up and deliver on that, then, that engenders the trust as well. But then continuing to invest in our people is really important as well. So, as we said, it all comes back to people. It's our clients, it's the people in the team. If we can demonstrate that we're helping them with their growth, helping them achieve their personal goals, helping them to be healthy, wealthy and happy, then that maintains that, focus on the direction we're trying to go. And, growing for the right reasons. So, the main reason we want to grow our business is we think we do a good job for our clients. We'd love to be able to keep doing that and we'd love to earn the right to be able to do that for more people. And then if we're able to do that, then it means our team can stick together because there's more opportunities for them to grow into different roles. If we stop growing, then if they want to, elevate their careers, they've got to go somewhere else. So that's the idea. And, it's working okay. We can always continue to improve, but that's kind of what we're focused on in that regard.
Nice. What about you, Marshall? How do you think about building and maintaining culture?
Part of it sort of stems from having a really good understanding as to, individuals' perspectives and what hat they're wearing. So when you're sitting down at a table, if there's a particular concern around a process or a philosophy, I really encourage the team to think about, right, so that's your perspective around managing, for example, assets at a client level, but let's put the licensee hat on and think about, right, we've got 14 advisors in this family serving, over 1,000 clients. How do we make sure that we make decisions that it can be consistently applied across the client base and to do so efficiently? So it takes time. I've certainly got a slightly different personality suite that might have a different cultural perspective, but together it works pretty well.
I mean, it's easy to say, get your team to think about putting different hats on. I think, it would be hard in practice, especially if people have been trained a certain way and are good at a certain job, to get them to think about these other jobs. How do you sort of help facilitate that?
It can be hard, and at the moment we're going through a process of effectively we talked about the one kitchen, 2 dining rooms, and making sure that we've got that one consistent investment philosophy, consistent processes. And there are differences in place, but when you actually sit down and go through it, there's a lot of similarities there. That we're probably 80% of the way there. It's only that final 20% that either needs to be tweaked or the process itself needs to be reviewed. So we're pretty close. And if you focus on the similarities, often you'll get there in the end.
And I think it is hard in this business, because it is still a personal services business. So advisors have still got to sit down across the table from someone, and they've got to own, things that go wrong or, things that go right. So there is an element of, you do need that advisor to have some level of autonomy and be able to exercise their professional judgment. So what we're trying to do is make that in the areas where they can add value to the client and take away the other stuff where they necessarily don't need to spend their time, or they're not necessarily the experts, and bring in some skill set around that.
And I mean, picking up on that, if you think about, there's a multitude of surveys that are in the marketplace that get down to a client level, and normally in the top 5 answers around why a client loves an advisor, it's not normally they pick the best investments for me. It's about, relationship management, peace of mind, certainty, confidence, outcomes for my family. And so, the processes that we put in place are designed to ensure that our advisors spend more time on that. And some of it's a lived experience, because, Jeff and I have worked with a number of advisors that have retired and they've transitioned their clients to ourselves. And we've seen the processes that they had in place that were all about portfolio management. They were all about fund manager A or fund manager B, and not so much about what was important to that individual client. And, if I reflect on some of those journeys 10 years ago, the conversations were all around fund manager A or fund manager B, and none of the conversations are about that anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Why do you think that has changed so much? Do you think that's like the client base changing and their expectations changing, or do you think that's the advisor side changing?
I think a big part of it is a considered decision of the business. So some advisors very much are of the viewpoint that their value proposition is based on the investments that they deliver at a client level. And not disrespecting that path, but when there's when you've got a large family of advisors, it's very hard to deliver consistent outcomes if every single advisor thinks they've got the secret sauce. And to Jeff's point earlier around trying to access some of the scale benefits at a client level, it's very hard to drive down costs for your end investor if every portfolio looks completely different.
And it's also the perspective of, if you've got such strong conviction in an idea for this client, share it with the team, because it might be the best idea we've got as part of the business, and therefore our other clients could benefit from that as well. So it's not operating in a silo. It's bringing it up to that business level to have the conversations there, so that all of our clients benefit. And that doesn't mean they're all going to have exactly the same portfolio. That's not the outcome we're driving towards. But they're going to have the same framework and building blocks, and philosophy is going to be consistent.
Well, let's turn to how you think about your client base. And when we were preparing for this interview, you described your typical client as the millionaire next door. And I love that phrasing. I was actually wondering, is it related to the book? Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I guess, can you paint a picture of who that client is, and also why you think that is the sort of the client, your like, I don't know, what would I say, the target client base? And Marshall, maybe if I start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of the listeners have read the book, but it was released in, I think, the mid-90s, set in the US. And, you know, our clients are remarkably similar to the individuals in that book. You know, it's the quietly successful individual or family typically that lives next door, that, you know, consistently spend less than they earn, they work hard, family values, and they're looking for someone to support them with their decision making, ensure that their hopes and dreams are realised. And, you know, if I were to describe that family in the accumulating stages, you know, they're typically a husband and wife. They're probably either side of 40 years of age. They've got their first home, a little bit of equity, not sure what else to do. As a family unit, they're probably earning $200,000 to $300,000 a year. But if you go up through the age cycle, and, you know, when Jeff and I first started working together, accumulators were the clients that we worked with. We were also quite a bit younger then. And we've aged along with our client base. And, you know, if I were to think about the pre-retirees or the retirees we work with, they're, you know, 20 years past that point. So typically, you know, if they're 55 to 65, they'll have a family home that's probably worth somewhere between $3 and $5 million, typically debt-free. About half of them probably have an investment property, which ideally, as they approach retirement, is debt-free. And, you know, our focus is very much on supporting them and growing their nest egg assets.
Do you give each client the book when they come in?
No, that's just all, things that we can use in the conversations. And
Yeah. So was it, I guess, was it like you looked at your client base and you thought this is a reflection of who they are, or was it a conscious decision to say these are the clients that we want to attract to the business and we're going to build the practice for them?
One of the key things that we talk about, and you know, when I'm bringing people into the team, and you know, humility is one of the really key traits that I really value highly, and I think that's sort of, you know, fairly all pervasive within our business. And I think as a result, we naturally started attracting similar people who are quite humble, curious, to Marshall's point, family oriented, wanting to build things, but they didn't necessarily think that they were all that, and still don't, and so not flashy. So that's the sort of thing that has always appealed to us. Often now we talk to our clients and they wouldn't even think that they're wealthy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so they've just gotten this mindset. We're just doing the best we can, working hard, consistently delivering, and just kind of go, well, you guys are in a pretty good position. You could actually be retiring sooner, or you could actually be spending a little bit more money in retirement.
Yeah,
and we have many more of those conversations now than we do saying you have to, you know, cut back on what you're spending.
I imagine that's a much more enjoyable conversation to have. Yeah. Like, you're actually a lot closer to retirement, that dream life, than you think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, I guess, the longer you participate in that journey with a client, you know, the importance of being able to encourage them to enjoy themselves. So we've got multiple clients that we certainly would put in that wealthy basket that have got $2 to $5 million of retirement assets plus, and yet it's hard work to get them to turn left when they get on a plane.
Yeah, right.
You know, they're still very much focused on making sure there's enough left over for the kids.
Yeah.
And, you know, we really encourage them, particularly in that first, say, 10 years of retirement, to enjoy yourself. You know, you don't have to fly business, fly premium at least, but go on some trips.
Yeah, at least fly, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, there are numerous clients that resist that, and I think the enjoyable part for me is seeing clients take those experiences.
Yeah. It would be really nice to see that change over someone's life. I guess I want to turn to investment philosophy, and, you know, if that's sort of the ideal client or the target client, then how do you go about building an investment philosophy for that client?
I mean, from our perspective, it sort of starts with, you know, a disciplined, really considered approach. and the portfolios that we research, build, and maintain for our clients. So there's a few components to it, but it starts with that discipline and rigor and consistency through market cycles. And our experience has taught us, and there's plenty of academic papers out there as well, that it's really important to focus on strategic asset allocation, erring on the side of caution and not getting swept up in the TAA or the tactical asset allocation or the next thing that the BDM's knocking on the door promoting to you. So all the portfolios we run, they err on the side of simplicity. There's minimal, if any, illiquid assets in them, and part of that is sort of framed in our memory from back at GFC time around strategies that were frozen. And when you're running either models or individual portfolios for a client, within me there's this sort of component that I sort of question. What's the the real impact at a client level if you're allocating a really small portion to something that's unlisted? Where's the real value add at a client there? Like if that performs poorly, it certainly has the impact or the potential to erode or undermine your relationship, and it also makes it harder to manage the portfolio. So it's very much this strategic asset allocation, the TAA, equally sort of looking to balance the passive with the active.
Okay.
And behind you I can see there's a book there by Peter Lynch, which Walk Upon One Up on Wall Street, and one of his phrases which I really like is this concept called diversification.
Yeah.
And effectively when we build portfolios, typically up to half of them is in low cost passive strategies, and then the balance is in a small basket of active managers. Not too many active managers, because when we've got too many active managers, you might as well own the market, and you'll probably get a worse outcome.
Yeah. So I feel like, do you feel like you're swimming against the tide a little bit with the the resistance to illiquids? I certainly feel, I'm a sample size of one, but the amount of people that we get in in this studio and they're talking about a bigger tilt towards illiquids, or the more fundies that come through who are illiquid or semi-liquid, it certainly seems to be the theme of the moment. How do you sort of balance that both within your own team and then I guess within like clients as well?
Yes, I think you've got to once again sort of think about the type of clients that you're dealing with. So within our family of clients, so putting my Evalesco hat on, they're primarily what you would call sort of retail clients. So if they're accumulating, they've got sort of up to $1 million worth of assets. If they're retirees, they're at the sort of 2 to 5 mark. And our focus there is very much on investing in things that that are understood, that are liquid. If clients have got larger balances or they're more sophisticated, that's a slightly different proposition, and certainly there are advisors that focus on that market. From our perspective, I think part of it is based on the learnings and the experience, and not wanting to be looking for a chair when the music stops. And I think just even over the last couple of months, when some of the trustees are coming out making some changes around what capital could flow in a superannuation environment to some of these private strategies, I'm cautious.
Yeah. It seems there's a few.
I'm cautious, and given that we haven't really participated throughout that journey, we've maintained our investment philosophy. I'd be doubly nervous about participating at this point if you haven't got the learnings or experience of the last 10 years.
I mean, you, in your experiences, you both would have seen like different fads or different trends come and go. Do any, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Does this moment sort of rhyme with any that you remember from the past?
Oh, there's certainly plenty of them. I mean, I think this moment, what we're seeing, and I think one of your last podcast attendees, sort of spoke about it, is from our perspective, when you're looking at portfolios generally, they're not making more asset classes. There's different characteristics.
Yeah.
And, when building a portfolio, effectively the building blocks are, there's businesses, either private or public. There are property assets, which are private or public. And then there are loans, which, broadly speaking, are bonds, cash and whatnot. So from our perspective, we focus on, blending those three and erring on the side of listed strategies versus unlisted. And, typically, people talk about the long-term performance of property and the concern around shares, but realistically, property only gets valued typically once when you're buying it and then when you're selling it. And if I were to auction your property every day of the year, you would get a different outcome. Okay, and so what we're seeing in the marketplace is there's a bit of a premium being given to the fact that something isn't being valued each and every day. And as a result, you're kind of avoiding the volatility piece, but the underlying dynamics are the same. You're still investing in a business or you're still lending money to someone.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've been toying with and learning a bit more about is, private credit is obviously the buzzword. And the Australian market for private credit is pretty immature, pretty narrow and pretty high risk, really, for what you get. If you go and look at, we were fortunate to go and visit some managers in the States earlier in the year who are big in the private credit space over there. And it's a totally different marketplace, totally different offering. They're actually lending money to substantial businesses who have a track record and can pay for it. And they're not lending money to property developers and expecting to get, return on that. So I think that's a learning and quite different. And we do have, part of our business which does focus on servicing more of the high net worth clients and more sophisticated clients. And they do allocate slightly more to private markets. But even there, and they've had, those advisors have had 20 years working in that space. Even they're quite conservative and not wading in knee deep straight away. So I think, to Marsh's point, the learnings out of the GFC and, illiquidity and what blew up through that period, that was when we started our business. So that was, we were a bit of a baptism of fire. We learned a lot, which was great. So we didn't have too mmany clients that we had to, suffer the pain with, but we certainly, took a lot of learnings out of that.
So Marshall, when you're thinking about these, the client, the millionaire next door, and you're thinking about building portfolios for them, how do you then think about, I guess, the client behavior and like that overlay and making sure the portfolios are, things that I guess they understand, but also that they stick with and over time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So it sort of comes down to managing the aspects that you can control and what you can't. And so around the centralised investment philosophy piece and building those portfolios, at an advisor level, whether you're doing that yourself or you've partnered with a research consultant or using some of the managed account solutions, you're very much focusing on building the strategies that are able to be consistently delivered over time, because typically the client is not in a position of sort of controlling those outcomes. So you've got to be able to manage those emotions and ensure that they can invest through the cycles. So behaviourally, we've found that ensuring that there's minimal, if any, gearing associated with that portfolio, that really helps with that. Yeah. And also investing in simple things that are easily understood. Now, the most important thing from my perspective is to ensure that advisors spend more time working with clients on aspects of their lives that the client can control.
Yeah.
So the client's personal behaviour. So the client's not determining what the fund manager's doing. You want the advisor to be able to engage with the client to ensure that, yes, they're spending less than they earn. They're paying off their mortgage consistently. They're putting more money into their nest egg or superannuation assets. So I think if a client feels as though they have a plan that might be independent of what's going on in the marketplace, they'll feel more confident and more likely to stay on that plan. The other messaging I like to use is it's about your personal economy. So there's lots of headlines out there that more often than not are designed to encourage you to do something, which is probably a silly decision. So at an advisor level, constantly reinforce to the client, forget the headlines, ignore the noise. It's about your personal economy. And by that I mean, once again, are you spending less than you earn? Are you growing your ability to earn an income? Are you doing all of those considered decisions that we put in your plan?
I love that. What's the Morgan Housel quote? The biggest determinant of your future wealth is your savings rate.
Yep.
I think that's a good message. I guess it's easier said than done, though. It's it's all good and well, three of us relatively financially literate, to sit here and say that. I guess where the rubber hits the road is when the market turns, and Channel 7's calling it a share market bloodbath. How do you find you communicate with clients effectively and sort of keep that behaviour on track in those moments?
Yeah, so certainly learnings have been applied from lived experiences through crises.
Yeah.
And, from, day one when things start to get a bit wobbly or the headlines are there, it's important to get communication out to clients. And so, it's sort of advanced to the point now where, we've got a consistent flow of podcasts and information that go out, interviews, being able to leverage past experiences to convey these are the decisions being made in your portfolios and this is why you don't need to make a change right now. And ideally they're with clients that have got some history, so you can actually go back in time and reference these were the headlines, this was the impact, but let's look where we are now.
Yeah.
And, we've lived through multiple crises and we're still here.
Yeah. I guess in that client communication piece, that's something that a lot of advisors are trying to optimize and figure out what's the most effective channels, particularly channels that they own, their own social media, their own podcast, their own website, their own email. Do you guys have any insights on what's really worked and what's been really effective at communicating with clients across all the different channels you have?
Yeah, it's still pretty boring, but email still works.
Still number one?
Yeah, so our open rates on our emails are pretty good.
Yeah.
You've got to balance that with, it's got to, rather than just, you don't want to add to the noise, because in those scenarios, you don't want to just be having more noise, but our clients, hopefully, we tell them, the easiest thing to do is just don't watch the news and have a bit of a laugh about it, but it's kind of true. But so, those emails need to be to the point and targeted as much as possible. During COVID, we started doing webinars because we found that our clients just wanted to see us and know that we were still there. And so we got amazing take up on, people signing on for the live webinar so they could just ask a few questions or just to see us kind of sitting there talking about stuff, which was great. So we kept doing that for a while. And then we found more people were watching it recorded later. So then we started doing some podcasts, and then, we haven't really nailed that, but we found that to be useful, more targeted at our existing clients, just to sort of keep it in front of them. But getting that regular flow of consistent communication. And then, the most rewarding things are when you get clients ring you when there's a, market downturn saying, should I be investing more?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. You probably don't need to. You've got a plan, but that's a great question. And, you're asking the right questions now. So that's very rewarding.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. And it's also, there's a couple of other components to it. One is managing client behaviour. So the advisor, that's where effectively you're earning your stripes. Like you're delivering long-term outcomes for clients in the midst of a crisis by managing their behaviours. And over time, there's only a couple of clients that might call now if they get a bit nervous. But when markets fall dramatically, your role is to support clients. And if you've got a really, really well-constructed portfolio that you understand is in sensible businesses, it will recover.
Yeah.
And to exit to cash is in 99.9% of the times completely the wrong thing to do. And if you're able to manage that relationship and ensure that a client gets through that, that's an outcome you've delivered for that family, and it's a story you'll be able to tell over and over.
Yeah.
And, the other part of it as well is the framing of your philosophy. Part of our quarterly rebalancing process is to ensure that sometimes markets do get ahead of themselves. And when that happens, we're trimming some of those positions at scale and we're topping up some of the things that haven't done well. And, since 2016, 2017, there's been, when we established the model framework, there's been numerous instances of market volatility. And sometimes that happens just prior to the quarterly rebalance. Does that mean you don't do the rebalance? No. It means you consistently apply that framework, which means that, ironically, at the time of volatility, you're actually buying more equities when everybody's selling. So it's important that you have the philosophy, you can articulate it, and you're consistently applying that regardless of the conditions.
Yeah, love that. I want to turn to the intergenerational wealth transfer because I think Marsh, you mentioned earlier that you struggle to get clients to walk onto a plane and turn left. But Jeff, you said many of your clients don't see themselves as wealthy, but a lot of these clients are going to be right in the middle of this intergenerational wealth transfer that is, starting to pick up pace. Do you speak about this with your clients, both, I guess, at a macro level, like what's happening across Australia, and then like at an individual level, how they should think about transferring?
Yeah, absolutely. More at a micro individual level. Yeah, the term intergenerational wealth transfer doesn't really resonate with our clients. That's more of an industry buzzword, and I think if you said that to them, they would kind of get what you're coming from. But because of the nature of our clients being quite humble and not necessarily thinking they're rich, but being family oriented, they do start thinking about, well, how can I help my kids? And having many more conversations over the last few years about how do I help them before I go, as opposed to just in the will, which is great. So it comes back to, we always say, going to keep torturing the flying analogies, but make sure you put your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure your retirement is safe. You've got a buffer there to allow you to do the things you want to do, and then go out and do the things you want to do before you start getting too worried about. There's going to be the rare circumstance where children have got themselves into difficulty, and you want to try and come up with a way of helping them. But in the main, it's about, okay, well, let's get a plan in place to make sure you can do what you want to do, that you're well protected, and then what is it that's important to you about how you help your kids. And so it can be as simple as, can I give them a small, top up to their deposit so they can go and buy a home, through to we've got a substantial family business that we need to transition to the next generation because we want it to keep running, and how's that going to go, which is a much bigger conversation. So it's a very personal thing, but it's a very common discussion as to, what we need to do in that space.
What have you learned about how advisors can play the best possible role in facilitating that conversation? I'm sure there's a lot of pitfalls or traps for young advisors. So how have you learned to have it in like a genuine and productive way?
Yeah, I think it's about the relationship that you have with a client. So, I guess the consequences, risk and actions, they can kind of go up the generations or down the generations. So if you think about a retiree that you're working with, obviously, there's the capacity and often a desire for them to help their kids, but it's also your ability to have an understanding as to the client and where they're at in their lives, because there's been a number of clients that we've worked with, whether individuals or couples, where you just start to notice some slippage.
Okay.
And you've got to be able to be confident enough to have that conversation around the potential that maybe there's some early onset dementia there, or do we need to start making some decisions around the way in which your portfolio is administered whilst you're still able to make those choices. And if that's the case, who do we need to bring into this meeting room so that there's some certainty for you?
God, if we were saying earlier that one of the best conversations to have would be to tell a client that they're actually wealthier than they think and they can enjoy life more, that must be one of the hardest conversations.
Yeah, it's really hard. And it, some of the best indicators, sometimes the advisor might miss it, but often it's the team members that you have that are dealing with the administrative tasks, the constant flow of information. They often pick it up too.
Yeah.
And so some of our team members are amazing. They're like, oh, have you noticed that is not as responsive as they used to be, or there's more grammatical errors in their emails, or there's a whole range of other things that you can sometimes pick up on.
Yeah. I guess to go to the tactical side of it, you mentioned, Jeff, a few ways that you've seen clients give money. Is a house deposit, I think, would just be like table stakes. That would be a classic one. I'd be interested to know if you've seen any sort of novel or different ways that clients have approached this task of transferring wealth through the generations.
Yeah, we've seen a few and help people put in place some different arrangements. One that we've worked with over a long time, and it's pretty much coming to the end of its planning now, so it's worked really well, was a couple that I was dealing with. They had just retired and they received an inheritance from pretty much two sides of the family at the same time. And they were, knockabout suburban people, not wealthy, even by my sort of definition, let alone theirs. But then they received an inheritance, and that meant that they were now all of a sudden coming into a fair bit of money. They had kids who had just bought their, two kids just bought their first home, had kids themselves, and they were very concerned about the impact on their lifestyle and what that would allow them to do. But they weren't really sure what their retirement was going to look like at that point in time. So we set up a structure so that they effectively lent the money to the kids to pay out their mortgage, and the kids would make a monthly repayment to the parents, who could then make some super contributions, and they also chose to put some money into a family trust, which would be there for the grandkids to pay for grandkids' education purposes. So they didn't give the money to the kids and just say, "There's your mortgage is gone," but they took that pressure off, so they weren't paying the interest.
Yeah.
But they still had some discipline that they were contributing towards it, and it sat really well with both generations. The kids didn't, they were from a humble upbringing. They were hardworking themselves. They didn't want to be just given a handout, but they did really appreciate the help in terms of taking that pressure off. So that, they contributed up to, where the super got to a level that they were comfortable their retirement was going to be good, and then put the money across for the family trust. So now the next generation, the grandkids, have been accessing that to pay for some of the parents have been accessing on behalf of their grandkids to pay for education. So that was, a good... it was a little bit complicated to get it across, to them in the first instance, but once it was set up, everybody was across it, and it's worked really well.
Yeah, I think thinking about two generations is an interesting way that advisors can think about it as well. Well, Jeff, Marshall, really appreciate you both coming on and sharing your insights. Thanks for joining us on Basis Points.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Really enjoyed the chat.
It's been great. Thank you.